Welcome to Wine Library TV. I am your host, Gary Vaynerchuk. And this, my friends, is The Thunder Show, aka the internet's most passionate wine program. And we have had some pretty legendary guests on this show. We've done okay. You know, we've gone outside the wine industry with like Wayne Gretzky and Jim Cramer and Dick Vermeil. And we've had some great legends within the industry, Nicholas Jolie, Jancis Robinson. But this may trump them all because there are going to be a ton of happy people. Because over the 4.5 years that we've done this show, there's only maybe Parker, maybe a couple, not that many people, maybe one or two others, but in the same breath of requested guests. And we've pulled it off. We're very, very humbled and honored to welcome Kermit Lynch to the Thunder Show. Kermit, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell the Vayner Nation first and foremost a little bit about yourself, you know, what you do, how you got into it, your philosophy. Riff a little bit for us.
I started out in Berkeley trying to make money as a musician. Failed at that.
Is that why you love this guitar thing? Is that, are you,
I've got some musician
he
friends.
Saw this, he's like, well, that's awesome.
Turn it around, show him
Yeah.
the front with the guitar
Nice, right?
strings. Isn't that something?
Yeah, we got that. So
I thought of a few guitarists who would enjoy that for Christmas.
well, good. It's a great idea.
A great gift.
It sure is. And so you grew up passionate about music.
That's right, and in fact, some neighbors when I was in high school turned me on not only to music but on to wine. They had wine with meals, and so I started. They'd invite me over as I was a senior in high school, so I was able to share wine with meals, and it became part of my life.
Culture.
That early. Mm-hmm.
No kidding.
Then I moved to Berkeley, and
And where were you
they
at
were
this
from
point?
Berkeley, so I moved to Berkeley, started buying wine where they had bought wine when they were students there. And that's sort of what launched it. Music, I tried to make it my business. Wine was my hobby. And, right.
Reversed it. So where did you grow up?
San Luis Obispo.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
And how was the wine scene when you were growing up there? Because
It was pretty much non-existent. I think there were 3 Italian family wineries, real small holdings, what we called rot gut.
Right. And so these friends of yours, they were musicians and they also were into wine?
In those days?
Yeah.
No, they were into other forms of psychic stimulation.
Understood. But the wine that you were drinking your senior year of high school and that really opened up the door, were these French wines? Or were these...
No, it was a fella in Berkeley who was actually from Poland. He was an immigrant.
No kidding.
And he was what we would call a negociant. He would go up into Napa and Sonoma and buy little lots of wine and blend them. And he sold them in half-gallon jugs. So as a student,
kidding.
I could afford them.
They were value-driven.
They were. In those days, there were a lot of jug wines. That Barbarone, you remember that?
Sure, Peachy Barbarone.
Yeah.
We had Mr. Opeet, another legend we had on the show.
Yeah, I'm telling you, those wines in those days, they were what I call entry-level wines for young people who couldn't afford to buy Bordeaux or the Napa, California cabs, you know, that. They were weighted, and they were enjoyable wines. They were not flawed wines like a lot of bulk wines today.
And how long did you stay in that phase of your wine interest, where it was occasional? What was what happened next in your wine journey?
Well, I got more and more interested in it, and got into a tasting group with a bunch of friends. There was a professor in it. There was an Oriental rug merchant, I remember, and
Nice.
Quite a varied group. And
how did you find them? Newspaper, the local store? Do you remember?
That is a good question. I think, there were very few outlets for fine wine then. So I think it was shopping and being invited to a tasting at the store and meeting somebody.
And what years is this now?
That would have been around 68 to, then I opened my store I got to Berkeley in 62. I opened my store, my wine shop in 72. So it was that 10-year period.
When did you decide that you wanted to be a wine merchant? When the music thing was going to happen?
Yet another band had broken up.
How many bands were you in?
Broken up, I would say, by drugs again.
Mm-hmm. Which was a common theme.
It kept changing, especially drummers. That was my biggest problem, was finding
Keeping
a decent drummer who would show up to drum. That was the first rule.
That was the only thing you wanted from that. Just show up.
So I got so frustrated because I finally had gotten a band together that I thought we could do something, and then again it fell apart. So I went to Europe for 4 months.
To just unwind?
Just for the hell of it. And,
but kind of
really bummed around Spain, France.
With a little bit of a wine agenda, because you knew you wanted, or not really?
Only drinking wine with meals as usual. That was it. But it was a little bit. I've heard Alice Waters at Penice talk about it too. Her first trip to France. It was such an eye opener that France and cuisine, that wine and cuisine were parts of the culture. You know, unlike
in
our country,
especially.
And I took that back and started thinking, well, I can't even afford a new harmonica. I think I'd better go to work.
Right.
And so I went around and applied for a job in the wine business. And nobody would hire me because I don't think we've seen a recession like we saw back in those years, 72, 73.
It was ugly out there.
It was really ugly. There were 5 decent wine shops in Berkeley, and today 0 of them are there. They all folded
at that time
during that recession.
Is that right?
Right. They were stuck with huge stocks of overpriced inventory.
And that was it?
And that was it. They didn't learn, like evidently you have learned, that when the recession hits, no matter whether it's just the wine business or generally like we have now, that you can take action. There are things, you know, they sat back and, you know, 1 month it'd be a 5% discount, then 3 months later, 10%. Pretty soon, same inventory, you know, with the price.
And once you open that Pandora's box, people just wait.
Yeah.
Consumers wait.
And also wine consumers, they like to see new arrivals.
The freshness.
You have to have new things to show people. Instead of just sitting, I can't buy any new inventory. I've got to get rid of what I have.
Right.
Well, they lost their customers.
And so that happened. None of them would hire you because they're going through this.
Right.
So what do you then do?
I borrowed $5,000 from my girlfriend.
Brilliance! Brilliant!
I could have borrowed $1.50 to buy a new harmonica.
Are you telling me right now that this entire, you're going to be humble, but I'll say it anyway, empire that you built, this brand equity, this legendary status in our industry, but you know, maybe you're not buying the New York Jets, but from a respect and what you've achieved in our industry, it's very, very high. Are you telling me the seed that started that whole journey was you borrowing $5,000 from a girlfriend?
That's right.
That is freaking awesome. That is awesome. Okay, so you had a girlfriend that had $5,000. I mean, let's think about this first. This is 19 what?
Talking about 72. Yeah.
1972, $5,000. I mean, that's a couple pennies.
That was, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
She must have really, really liked your guitar skills. I mean, that's a pretty big... Now, what happened to this girlfriend?
Well, we eventually broke up.
I see.
You know,
Yeah. But she was around for a long time, at least?
Yeah, we lived together for probably about 8 years.
Okay, good. So it was a substantial relationship.
Oh, quite.
It wasn't,
yeah.
You know. So you borrowed $5,000 from your girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And
Joan Connolly.
Big shout out
to
Joan.
Joan.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Joan. All the wine people in the world should thank Joan. She's a major player in the history of the wine industry in America. Who would have ever known? Okay, so Joan allows you to borrow these $5,000. Then what?
I opened a retail shop, and I remember it well. By the time I put the phone in, I painted the walls, whatever, I had enough money left to buy 32 cases of wine, and that's how I started out.
Amazing.
32 cases of wine on the floor, you know, stacked on the floor.
Yep.
And they were wines from all over. They were California wines.
What distributor did you buy them from?
A bunch of them.
Bunch of different
ones.
ones.
Bunch of them, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I started going out to California wineries on my own.
Yep, making relationships.
And that appealed to me, obviously,
Sure.
because that's how I continued in France. Then
what did you call the store?
The first name was European Wine Selections, only because I had made a deal with a guy who wanted to sort of get little franchise stores started. And his great offer, listen to this, you'll love this as a businessman, was anything I bought from him, I could return if I couldn't sell it.
I understand.
You like that?
I like that one. Can we still do that? Anybody watching? Brilliant. Got it. So obviously,
And that saved me.
That was
saved
big.
Me, yeah.
Sure.
Because I was buying a lot from him, obviously, with
Sure.
an offer like that.
Sure.
And he invited me to go to France on his buying trip.
Right.
He mainly imported French wines. So I went
What was
along
this
with
guy's
him,
name?
Dick Buck. So I went along with him on his buying trip. He bought 100% from Negociants. So it was a trip to Burgundy, and we visited Negociants. That was my first introduction to.
Fascinating.
And I went back, and I had seen what he bought, the wines he'd selected. We'd have big, the tastings in Burgundy.
Yeah.
You tasted a lot of different wines, and I sort of thought, well, why don't I just go and buy it myself, because I didn't always agree with him. And
You had your own palate.
and about that time, the recession was so bad that Frank Schoonmaker, I received a book about that big of Frank Schoonmaker wines that were in Europe at reduced prices. For example, I would be able to sell, just to let you know specifically, it was in 1972, because by then we were 1974, Echezot from Mongiard-Meunier, which I could retail for $4.95 a bottle.
Oh boy, these prices.
Yeah,
That's
a book
incredible.
a book that thick of wines from Germany, Italy, France, Spain, from all Frank Schoonmaker.
So the tough market, and you working hard and being keen and digging through those putting in the hustle, allowed you to really.
The other thing is all the wines from Schoonmaker were stored in France, in the country of origin. They weren't in the U.S., so nobody could taste them. So I went to Europe and visited the domains.
When you would visit, who would hold down the store? Or would you have to be closed?
Let's see, Connie, her name was Connie Rowell.
Connie held up shop? She would open and close?
Right.
No kidding.
Well, that was the problem with Connie.
She wouldn't always open.
I arrived for work one day, and the postman was walking out. And it was dark inside. I said, "How did you get in?" He said, "Well, the door was open.
Oh, Connie.
The mail's on the counter."
And so that's kind of how this all started.
Mm-hmm.
And then what? So the store started thriving as you started getting out of that recession.
It was quite a bit, yeah. I mean, all the other stores around were selling their old inventory, and I had all this great new inventory coming in.
And consumers were there. They still wanted it.
Ridiculously low prices.
Sure, so the timing was right.
Yeah.
And so that's how you grew your retail business.
That's right.
And then what was the next chapter of your career? When did you start really thinking about putting your name on the back of the label and really going into that, being a renowned branded supplier?
I made a deal with the Frank Schoonmaker rep out there, Karl Petrowski, a fellow very important to my career. He's the one I'd travel with to visit the European vineyards, and he allowed me, when I was buying direct at another domain, he allowed me to put the wine into the Schoonmaker container. When I was buying
weren't
small
buying enough,
quantities,
right.
I couldn't get a container together.
That's right. And so just to put that
So
into
he helped
context,
me a lot.
containers, lots of cases 1,200 or 14, that's probably going to be over what you wanted to buy. So being
What I
able to
could
throw
buy.
being able to throw your 200 or 100
Right.
or whatever mixed cases saved you an enormous amount of money, or even allowed you to even do it.
That's right.
Under your back label at that point?
No,
No.
it would say Schoonmaker Selections on it, even though it wasn't.
When did you make the leap to becoming Berkeley wine merchants? When did that happen?
I think my first containers with my own label on it were around 1976, 1977.
So you made the jump fairly early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you sold those exclusively through the store?
Yes.
When did you then make the jump to being outside of just your own store, having these wines represented around the country?
That was an important moment. I'll tell you how it happened. I didn't have any ambition to be a national importer. I was happy with my retail store, but I started seeing as I was advertising these wines, like Vieux Telegraph, like Domaine Tempier, other importers from, say, New York or Detroit or Boston were going to those domains and trying to get the wines to sell themselves. And I'm starting to have somebody tell me, "Oh, sure, Kermit, you can have what you had last year, but we've got other importers now. We can't sell you more."
And then there was price, differences in different markets.
Yeah.
So you were building
So
brands and then competing with yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And so then you said, wait a minute, I need to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, this is just...
That's exactly how that was the decision. It was, I mean, believe it or not, it wasn't a decision like, oh, I want to build this great,
national
huge business or anything. It was sort of like, in order to protect my sources and have more wine
Sure.
for my customers, I'm going to have to represent
Kermit,
the nation.
sometimes the best offense is a good defense. You know?
That's right.
I mean, so that's clearly what
That's
happened.
what happened.
So that happened in the mid-'70s, and then how many markets did you sell to going into the early '80s?
Well, in those days, I still just had somebody minding the store, one employee. So when I would visit New York or certain other markets, and then I was going to France to buy wines, I didn't have much time for it, and also I didn't have a knack for it. I was New York made me angry in those days, the market in those days, the reaction I got. I would arrive, for example, at the New York retailers and say, here, I'm importing these wines, and I want to make, this is the way I wanted to do it. I wanted to find one retailer.
To support you.
Yeah. You take it. No one else will have it in New York.
Right.
Not one person would take me up on it. And I heard things, my favorite line was, I offered him Cocherie. He said,
that little producer?
What? It's 50%. I can buy Merceau for 50 cents a bottle less. Why should I buy
the greatest producer of all time? I mean, there was just a lack of education of brands back then, right? Of the producers. When you look back at that time, people were buying by varietal.
That's right, and negociant names were important. The small growers nobody was looking for them.
That's right. So it was just a different market.
So then
you were were you then forced into selling the wines to a distributor who just put them in as many different places as possible?
That's what I finally decided, but it wasn't
and who was
like
your first
that.
Distributor?
My first distributor was Neil Rosenthal, who's,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Went on to do the same thing.
Right.
Absolutely.
So he was a great one because he really had an appreciation for what I was doing.
Sure.
And then Michael Skurnick, worked with him for years.
Yep. Great guy.
But it worked out much better too for me because they were like my creations, even though I didn't create them. They were my selections, and I was sensitive about them. And to hear somebody say something like that about a Coach,
you were too emotional.
I was too emotional. It pissed me off.
Right. You wanted to punch him in the face a little bit.
Well, I wouldn't want to hurt my.
Yeah, your hands are important. You got to play the guitar, right?
Got to get the cork out of the bottle too.
How many brands do you represent today?
It's about it's a little over 100 domains.
100 domains.
Right, French and Italian.
And have you given any thought to expanding into other places in the world?
No, I mean, of course, I've given it thought.
Are you just not passionate about anywhere else?
Especially France and Italy. I think the wine culture there, it's so vast, it's so deep, the centuries that it's been developing, that interests me a lot.
That's what attracts you.
Yeah, it does. It's like, for me, taste of wine that's got good fruit and a dose of some kind of oak, and those kinds of questions about wine, I just find them banal. They don't interest me.
Yeah.
Or you go to France or Italy, you've got all this history and the cuisine that goes with the
What about
wines.
Spain? Why did Spain never grab?
I did import Spanish wines.
I thought
for a
so.
while.
That's where I was going to go with it, but I wasn't.
And I worked with a lot of California wineries, but
that I didn't know.
But I was spreading myself so thin. I mean,
and this is what you really love.
Yeah.
I mean, really, if you just wanted to focus just on France or just on Italy, that would have been just fine too.
But I want to straighten something out because
good. Let's get on the record.
A lot of people think, oh, he's the guy who doesn't like California wines, because I may be the only retailer in the United States who doesn't sell California wines, and there I am, right in the middle of it. It wasn't like that. It was actually one of those crazy stories that I was great friends with Joseph Swan. Yeah. The great California winemaker who made probably the greatest Zinfandel.
Was the guy
that ever existed.
Was the Zin I desperately wanted.
It's a 1968. It's still great.
Still dominates.
Yeah.
I had it a tasting a few months ago. Actually.
Yeah, still good.
Incredible.
Anyway, Joe and I were good friends, and he'd go with me those first buying trips because he had about 30 words of French. And I only had about 4, so he translated. He was my translator.
With his 30 words.
Right.
Go ahead.
And he'd travel with a case of tenths of his Zinfandel to open for the French winemakers.
No kidding.
Anyway, Joe and I were so close, I'd go up and taste with him. I was passionate about his wines. Well, he was convinced by Andrei Talachev to plant Pinot Noir on his property. And I first vintage I bought, second vintage, third vintage, I went up there and tasted it with him. And I could not buy that wine from my store. I just couldn't recommend it to my customers. And I couldn't tell Joe that. I could not. Right.
So wait a minute.
Yeah,
your
you're
love
right.
for are you about to tell me that your love for Joe,
right,
because you didn't want to tell him that to his face, you decided to go the complete other way and make a declaration that you were not going to carry any California wines. This way he didn't feel like he was being...
That's right.
That is an amazing story.
It coincided with my...
That is amazing. I'm sorry to interrupt
you. It coincided with my interest in French wines.
So
I said, these are the wines I'm really loving. I want to specialize here.
That was the tipping point, right?
I can't spread myself too thin. And this way, I don't have to tell Joe.
So you were leaning that way, and this was just the thing that pushed you over.
And I don't want anybody to jump to the conclusion that Swan didn't make some great Pinot Noirs. He did. There was one vintage when I just couldn't.
And you didn't want to hurt his feelings.
Didn't want to hurt his feelings.
Have you taken a lot of crap on the California wine
Well, it's
thing?
this thing about, he's the guy who doesn't like California.
You hear the
wines,
whispers in the back.
Yeah. But I'll go.
Do you drink?
I will.
Let me ask you this question: do you drink? No. You've not drank a California wine.
No, I just had a 1966 Martini Barbera the other night that would have just shaken your soul.
Have you ever drank a California wine that says 1980 something on it?
Mm-hmm.
How about 90?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Ridge. I like Edmund St. John, but I don't follow it. So you can name 100 California wineries, and I might have heard of 2 or 3 now. But I also want to say something else about this because I'm talked about in relation to California wines. I feel like they sort of betrayed me in a way.
Okay.